Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we are studying the prophet Ezekiel, the Navi Ezekiel, chapter 4. This is Saul Weinreb, the host of your podcast. In the last chapter, we just studied how the Navi, the prophet, was not able to speak on his own. God had, so to speak, chained him so that he himself, as a concerned leader, as a concerned person, wasn't allowed to and wasn't able to speak to the people themselves because they refused to listen. However, the way we explained it, he was told to speak only in the name of God, to say the messages that God gave him. In this chapter, it's going to begin a series of rather than speeches, one way of conveying a message to people is to say it to them. But he is actually asked to speak, so to speak, to the people, to convey the message to them by doing various symbolic acts through which he's going to try and convey the message to the people by explaining to them, this is why I am doing these acts. And by doing an act, especially an act that entails a significant amount of suffering on his part, this will hopefully arouse the people and awaken them to the purpose of the message. So that's what this chapter is going to begin. It's that new series. So now let's look at chapter 4, verse 1. V'atov en adam, and you, human being, kach lechal aveina, I would like you to take a brick. So the first symbolic act is going to be not one where he tortures himself or does something dramatic so much, but he's going to set up almost a panorama, a model, which is going to convey, this is what I'm talking about. This is the purpose of what I'm doing. So he's going to take this brick, v'nosata osala fanecha, place it before you. We're imagining he's in his home, or so put on the floor or on a table or something, this brick, v'chakosa aleha ir es Yerushalayim, and you engrave upon it an image which would be understood as the image of Jerusalem. Maybe some buildings that are known for Jerusalem, images that people will recognize. This brick represents the city of Jerusalem. V'nosata aleha matzor, and you should place around it a siege. Maybe soldier little pieces representing soldiers surrounding this city. Vanisa aleha dayek, and you will build upon it. Dayek are towers. V'shafachta aleha solala, and a siege ramp. You should pour down some sand that represents a siege ramp towards the city. V'nosata aleha machanos, and then surrounding that you have the camps where the soldiers are based. V'sim aleha karim saviv, and you should place upon the city models, the images of rams, battering rams that are there to crush the walls of the city. So in other words, set up a scene of war against the city of Jerusalem, a scene of siege. People will then understand that the message you're trying to convey is one that is regarding the siege of Jerusalem, v'ata, and then you should take until now, everything seems pretty typical of someone who would want to set up a war scene. But this next thing in verse 3 is a little different. Machvat barzel, take a pan, an iron pan. Machvat usually means a pan. Take an iron pan, v'nosata osa kir barzel, and place it as a wall of an iron, beincha uvein ir, between you and the city. Exactly what this wall, this iron wall, represents is difficult to. I'm not sure if this was the inspiration for Winston Churchill when he said the Iron Curtain descending upon the Soviet Union. Although it's quite likely that this was the inspiration for that term Iron Curtain that we're familiar with from the Cold War, But either way, there are several interpretations of what this iron wall is supposed to represent. Rashi explains that it's a reference to the wall of the city, but a lot of commentators say, well, he already built a wall of the city in Others say, the Radak explains that this refers to the stubbornness of the people of Israel. Others say that this refers to the God's hidden face, the Hester Panim, that God is saying there's an iron wall between me and the people. But I think that I'm going to go with the Malbim's explanation because it fits the words of the pasuk and it fits the theme, I think, the best. And that is, Beincha uvein ha'ir, the iron wall is between you, Ezekiel, you, Yechezkel, and the city, because you are not able to reach the city with the message. The city is refusing to listen to you, and I've tied you up with ropes. You cannot speak to them because your rebuke isn't going nowhere. The iron wall represents your inability to communicate the message to the people in the city. On the other hand, he is able to communicate this message to the people that are not in the city, the people that are with him in the exile. And then you should set your face against it. Your face here probably represents the face of the enemy who is attacking. We're going to see later in the chapter where Yechezkel's own body, his arm, represents the arm of the enemy attacking. And then the city shall then be under siege, and you shall then lay siege upon it. And this doesn't mean you, obviously, but it means you representing in this image the enemy. Osi lebeis Yisrael, and it should be a sign for the people of Israel. The os is really for the people of Israel that are with him in Galus, in exile. The ones that are there in Babylon, this will be a sign for them and a sign to understand the meaning of the rest of the message that we're about to begin. So now that you set this up, now they know and they understand that the subject at hand is the subject of the destruction and fall of Jerusalem. Viata, and now you, shechav al tzidcha hasmali, I want you to lie down on your left side, v'samta es avon beis Yisrael olav, and the left side upon which you are lying will then bear the sins of the house of Israel. Mispar hayomim asher tishkav olav, the number of days that you're going to lie on your left side, tisa es avonam, you will bear the sins of the people. I'm going to explain in a minute, but let me read verse 5 first. I'm going to tell you how many years they sinned for, lemispar yomim, and it's going to be an account of days. So you're going to lie there for a number of days, which will represent the number of years that they sinned, which is shalosh meot v'tishim yom. So you're going to lie for 390 days. V'nasasa avon beis Yisrael, and with this you will carry the sin of the people of Israel. First of all, what does this mean, carry the sin of the people of Israel? And second of all, what is this 390 days? We're going to see in a minute that he's going to sit another 40 days representing the house of Yehuda, the house of Judah. So as we know, the people started off as the people of Israel, all 12 tribes. Eventually they split. But then both the northern and southern kingdoms lasted for a while until eventually the northern kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians, and until eventually the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, or as about, in this case, by Ezekiel's time, about to be destroyed by the Babylonians. There's a lot of different explanations as to how to calculate these 390 days and 390 years and 40 days, 40 years, but it seems pretty clear that the 390 days represents to the people the history of the people. They all know that the house of Israel, Judah and Israel, everyone was together until a certain point, and that's represented by this 390 days, and then Israel was punished, and Yehuda still had some merit, enough to continue lasting, more of a chance. Then eventually Yehuda sinned too, and then they were destroyed. So the people will understand that these 390 days are referring to one period in history before the destruction of the northern kingdom, and the 40 days represent the 40 years and represent the time when it was just Yehuda left, just Judah, just the southern kingdom. This is something that people will understand. By lying on his left side, what does it mean, tisa, you will carry their sin? It doesn't mean, of course, that he is going to somehow atone for the people. It doesn't work that way. But rather, tisa es avonam, you are, by doing this, essentially what you're showing is that you are representing their suffering because you are suffering with them. You're not doing this in a way of arrogance by saying, haha, here I am in exile, I'm escaping the destruction, you guys in Jerusalem are getting destroyed. Because when he's teaching the people in exile that they can still relate to God, there's still hope, they can still build, they can still grow, if only they repair their personal lives, some could accuse him of saying, and by prophesying destruction for the people of Jerusalem, some could accuse him and say, you don't care about them, you're not with them. So God is saying, no, you are going to lie here. This is an extremely difficult and an extremely uncomfortable way of self destruction, not destruction, but of suffering imposed upon himself, which represents, no, I am suffering with them. This suffering is something that we all are experiencing and we all are living with. And I'm not demonstrating the people of the exile by celebrating and saying I got away, but rather I'm showing that this suffering is something we all went through and we all have to identify with. So verse 6, V'chilisa es eila, and then when you complete those 390 days, then you will turn over, V'shachavta al tzidcha hayimani shenis, and now for the second round of lying down on your side, you will lie down on your right side. V'nasasa savon beis Yehuda, then you will carry the sin of the house of Yehuda, arboim yom, for 40 days, yom lashana nesativ lach. For what it'll be a day per each year, that is what I'm giving you to lie on your side. There's a lot of talk about where the 40 years comes from, just like there was about the 390. The 40 years maybe represented the 40 years in the desert and various things. I already explained it the way I think it means, and I'm not going to go into the specifics of where these numbers come from exactly. But the general idea, I think we got. But now, again, you are going to look at, when you're lying down, you're going to face the model that you put on the ground in order to remind people, I'm not just lying on my side, I'm lying on my side to demonstrate that these 390 and 40 years of sin resulted in the siege of Jerusalem, which is represented in front of you, and your arm should be bare and outstretched. In other words, showing that you, as if the Radak and Rashi explained that the Zeracha Chashufa is the image of an arm lifted against the city, they're representing the soldiers that are marching or camping against the city, again showing that Ezekiel is acting as if he is the enemy in this, against the city in this model. And you should then say prophecy upon it. Clearly, this Nibeis Aleha means that Ezekiel is speaking. He's explaining what he's doing. When people are seeing him, people come to visit him, people, of course, are talking about this strange guy doing the strange things. The message is getting out. So Ezekiel is going to speak and explain the meaning of what he's doing. Nibeis Aleha. So he's not speaking. He's just explaining what the purpose of this very dramatic thing that he's doing. But behold, God says, you know that I placed ropes upon you. In other words, I locked you up. I'm not allowing you to speak on your own. You cannot flip over from side to side until the days of the siege are over. In other words, you are stuck in this position. You're stuck doing this. You're able to speak to explain what I'm telling you to do, but you don't have any ability to make choices on your own, representing the inability of the people under siege to have any independence or make choices on their own. But that's not it. In verse 9, we're going to see the next symbolic act, which means the suffering is even more. And not only is the freedom of choice and independence taken away from you by the siege, but physical suffering is significant as well. Viata and you, kachelcha, I want you to take. It lists several types of different grains. Chitin is usually translated wheat, usorim, barley, upol, and beans. Va'adashim is usually translated as lentils, v'dochan, v'kusmim, and millet and emmer. These are different kinds of grains. And v'nosata osam b'chli echad, and I want you to put them in a keli, in a vessel. Basically crush them together and make them into osam, and you mix them up into a dough and bake them into a bread. Mispar hayamim, for all of those days, 390 plus 40, it's 430 total. That you're lying on your side. For 390 days, this is what you're going to eat. There's been various calculations as to how much calories this is. We're looking at probably somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 calories a day, which is extremely minimal for a full-grown man to survive on for that long. He was lying in bed and hardly moving, which helps, possibly barely enough to actually survive. But he's doing this and suffering in order to show that he is not being arrogant and saying that I'm better because and we're better because we are away from Jerusalem, but rather he's showing that he is bearing the suffering with them. And the amount that you're going to eat is esrim shekel hayom, is the weight of 20 shekels a day. Me'es ad es tochalenu. That's how much you eat in every 24-hour period. Mayim b'masura tishte, and you'll drink water by measurement. You won't have a lot of water, so you'll drink shishis sahin, a sixth of a hin, me'es ares tishte. This is estimated again to be a small amount of water, but probably barely enough to survive. And the way you're going to eat this, as the same way you eat it as a barley cake. Apparently, that was a thing that they would do. So God is saying, bake it the same way you would bake a barley cake. And how will you bake it? You'll bake it in front of the people over using human fecal matter as fuel. Dried feces has been used for fuel for a long time, but usually it's dried animal dung, which is often used for fuel. But dried human dung is more disgusting to people, and God wants him to do it that way. So Vayomer, and so again, he's showing that the people are going to be degraded while they are under siege. They're going to be degraded. They're hardly going to have anything to eat. They're hardly going to have any water, and that which they do find to eat will be disgusting. But that to that level they will be degraded. The Vayomer Adonai, and God says, this is verse 13, Kacha yochlu v'nei Yisrael es lachmam tamei b'agayim, when the people are under siege, but actually here, when the people are then sent out into the nations in exile, those that survive the siege will eat their bread in an impure way among the nations asher adichem sham, that I will send them out to. So what's interesting here is that se'at ha'adam, using that really disgusting way of cooking over feces, is disgusting in a physical way. Now there's two types of dirty and disgusting. One is the spiritual impurities that we're aware of, the spiritual impurities associated with the various things, the creepy crawly creatures versus dead animals that have not been slaughtered properly versus human bodies and things like that, which impart a ritual or spiritual impurity. There's also the impurities that are not necessarily ritual impurity, but are just disgusting in a physical way. They're just filthy, such as fecal matter, which is just disgusting in a filthy way. The two are very different. There is no ritual impurity imparted by human fecal matter, but it's just something disgusting. Now, Va'omar, in verse 14, Ezekiel kind of mixes the two in a way that's interesting. Ezekiel says, I have never experienced spiritual impurity, and he is going to connect spiritual and physical impurity, which brings us to an issue which we're not going to go into in depth here, but the idea of spiritual impurity, people understood that to also teach them physical cleanliness and physical purity. And the two are mixed. In other words, if I have been guarding myself from spiritual impurity, how much more so would I be guarding myself from physical dirt? So when one washes one's hands to eat food, for example, which we know is being done in a ritual manner for spiritual impurity, one should, therefore, according to what we're seeing here in Ezekiel, one should learn from that one should also make sure that his hands are physically clean and wash them off with soap, and any dirt and any junk should be washed off. There is a relationship between spiritual and physical impurity. For Omar, and thus Ezekiel said, you're asking me to do something really, really, it was one thing to do something that's suffering, but here you're asking me to do something that's dirty. Aha, whoa, oh, God, Adonai Elohim, Lord my God, I have never even contaminated my soul. Nafshi unavela utrefolo achalti. I've never eaten animals that haven't been slaughtered properly or animals that weren't kosher. Minu raiva arata, from the time I've been a child. Velo ba befi besar pigel. And not only that, even things. A pigel is an animal that is brought on the altar, but in the temple. But the priest had an improper thought while bringing it. So there's really nothing at all wrong or disgusting about the meat. There's only a technical, halachic, Jewish law problem that he didn't think properly. So in other words, I was so careful with the spiritual uncleanliness, which is minuscule, which you don't even see, which most of the world would eat without a problem. But for sure, how could I therefore go ahead and eat something that's so dirty and disgusting as a cake that's been baked over human feces? So Ezekiel is saying, I was so spiritually pure, how could I for sure cannot eat from something that's physically disgusting like that. And then God agreed with me. He said, Vayomer Eli, this is verse 15, God said to me, Re'eh, okay, fine, you can see, Nasati lecha et tzifi'ei habakar. I'm going to give you the dried out bits of cow's dung, tachat gelulei adam, instead of human feces. Using animal dung as fuel is actually something that has been very common throughout human history, and even in modern times, dried cow dung is used as fuel. So this would not be considered disgusting. It might be to us in modern times, but in those days that was considered normal fuel. And then you can bake your bread over that. So here we have a little bit of an insight into the something that's behind the halacha, something that there's Jewish law that tells us about ritual impurity, but from that Ezekiel derived the practice of physical cleanliness, which is the lesson of these impurities. He said, behold, I have never even contaminated my soul with things that are spiritually unclean. How much more so do I not want to contaminate my body with something that's disgusting? It's one thing to emulate the suffering of the people, to teach a lesson and to lie on my side for 430 days and hardly eat and hardly drink anything. But to do something disgusting and dirty, that I'm not ready to, please don't make me do. And God agreed with him. Vayomer Eli, and then God said to me, this is verse 16, Ben Adam, human being, Hineni shover mati lechem b'Yerushalayim. Why am I doing this? And of course, God means to tell him this so that he can convey this to the people. As we said, V'ni beis alel, while you're there, you need to explain what you're doing. Hineni shover, I'm going to break the staff of bread, is the literal translation in Jerusalem, meaning the people will not have enough bread to eat. When they eat, when they're under siege. This is an interesting flip, because before God said, when it came to the impurities, he was saying the bread that they're going to have to eat when they're enslaved in other countries and exiled is dirty, disgusting bread. Both on a spiritual level, they're going to have difficulty keeping the rules of kosher and so on, and also on a physical level, they'll be enslaved, they'll be eating dirty, yucky food. So God is here saying now that while under siege, also achlu lechem b'mishkol, they will eat bread by weighing it out. In other words, they'll hardly have any, so they'll have to ration it and portion it out. Uvida'aga, and with worry that they may not have enough bread the next day. Umayim v'masura, and whatever water they do obtain, they'll have to drink by a measure. Uvashimamon yishtu, and when they drink it, they're going to drink it in a situation where their shimamon is horror, is often described as horror, or just being completely overwhelmed with sorrow, worry, anxiety, etc. Laman yachzeru lechem umayim. This is in such a way that they will be missing, they will not have enough bread and water to eat. V'neshamu ish v'achiv, and people will stare in a blank-faced way at each other with nothing to say, nothing to communicate, because there's nothing to do. They're out of ideas, out of ways. V'namaku ba'avonam, and they will wither away and melt, and sometimes translated as melt away, ba'avonam, because of their sins. This is, of course, not a very encouraging or pleasant chapter, but one from which we can learn a lot. Ezekiel was now asked to do these symbolic acts to convey this message, and to the people that are with him in the exile. Thank you so much for studying chapter 4 of Ezekiel together. Looking forward to studying together chapter 5, and of course, the remainder of this book of this prophet.